Nobody wants to be in that headline, right? Nobody wants to be the owner of that vessel.
Welcome to Undocked, Heather. So nice to have you here.
Well, thank you guys so much. It's great to be here and have a conversation today. I feel like, jumping out of our email and into this version of real life is kind of a fun
Much more fun
way to
than
get to
email,
talk to you
I
guys
agree.
today.
So Heather, you don't know Raal particularly well, and Raal, you don't know Heather particularly well. So Heather, and obviously for anyone in our audience who doesn't know you, maybe you could start off by just introducing yourself and Ripple.
Sure thing. Okay, so I'm Heather Combs. I'm the CEO here at Ripple. I am a pretty big newbie still, or at least I try to hide behind that. I've been at the organization good 15 or 16 months now. I joined the private equity firm Bleecker Street as they brought together a number of organizations and really launched Ripple forward. I don't come from the maritime industry, so I'm learning so much. I'm enjoying it so much. This industry has the absolute best locations of any job I've ever had. We should definitely talk about how we get to go all the fun places. But I come from a background of tech-enabled services and technology and building digital products with kind of a thread through HR and workforce readiness and training and compliance. So I came in at that angle because Ripple is really an end-to-end HR maritime software. So vertical, only deep in maritime, and is meant to solve, the challenges of seafarers and crew members on board.
I find it so interesting meeting people who are not traditionally from a maritime background and come in with relatively fresh eyes. So I'd be interested to know what are some of the things that surprised you in the kind of first 12 months or so of being in this industry, apart from the glorious locations, obviously.
Oh, come on. That's the most fun one. Surprises. It is a very, very relationship driven, people first industry. I had no idea from the outside, the interconnectivity of multi-generational families, of sort of these long histories and companies, how the industry, everyone knows everyone. You walk into a room and they're so interconnected, even when they're from different segments and from different parts of the operations. So that's been, to me, a surprise, kind of a pleasant one, maybe following COVID, to see how human-centric the industry still is.
I think when you're a newbie, one of the things that I struck, I remember, because I wasn't from a maritime background when I came in, which was 20 years ago. And one of the things that has always impressed me about this industry is how you can go into a room and not know anybody, and how welcoming it can be as that. So on the one hand, you've got this kind of huge technical, kind of huge life experience that a lot of people in the maritime industry have, but yet they're very, very welcoming. And I always put that down to the fact that as a seafarer, everybody knows what it's like to be a stranger in a strange land. Everyone knows what it's like to be separated from family and people and have to kind of make friends quickly with a new group of people. And I always had that idea that was what it was all about.
That makes total sense on how people would really come to think about it that way, they're new all the time, every time they walk onto a ship with a new crew. And so just welcoming and environmental. Of course, it's as multicultural, multinational as any industry I've ever been part of, which is such a fun way to see the world and to get a lot of those influences from different parts of the world and from different, where they are in the trajectory of digital transformation. Because that's, of course, what attracted me to the opportunity, is to be part of that, to see the industry transforming right before your eyes, the way some industries had in my past, like media or tech, that is now happening in maritime.
I think one question I'd have for you is kind of interesting, because it sort of does depend a little bit on where you sort of grew up, where you went to college, your family connections, as whether you'd had any exposure at all to maritime, or whether it was this completely walled garden that you suddenly found yourself in. What was the ground there?
This episode of Undocked is brought to you by Acceleron. Running ships is complex enough. Managing emissions compliance shouldn't make it harder. Yet every year, new rules add more admin, more data to collect, more reports to file, and more pressure on your teams. Acceleron's Loreka 360 emissions desk changes that. It's a complete compliance service that handles every step, Data checks, documentation, forecasting, and verification, all powered by intelligent software and guided by experts who've actually worked at sea. The result? Accurate reporting, less stress, and more time to focus on what really matters, operating ships. Find out more at acceleron.com/emissions-desk.
So I'm from San Antonio. It's where I grew up, definitely fairly landlocked. I went to college at Texas A&M. So again, didn't move to a ship, but certainly was around that military influence there. What I would say my only real maritime exposure is just I'm an avid recreational boater. So
Mm.
my happy place is to be on the water with friends or with the family. I have a bunch of daughters that like to be out there, but certainly not the size of vessel I've come to know at Ripple um, in that. And then I think it met sort of this intersection of just love of travel. So I had been on some cruises, had certainly been in many a port city, had seen some of the traffic, but being an American, I live in the Washington, D.C. area. Even the ferry space has been eye-opening because
Mm.
we don't think of ferries as daily transportation in this part of the world. And to get over in Europe and have everyone using ferries the way we might use buses or subways was,
Mm.
fascinating.
You have to be careful not to become a bore as well. I remember I went island hopping in Croatia after I'd been working in the industry for about 3 or 4 years, and I ruined the holiday by every ferry we went on. Like, that's a violation. There shouldn't be people on there. They didn't even announce the safety.
Right.
So be
I'm still
careful
at
of
the
that
other
when
end.
you
I'm
drive.
like, every one that I get on, I'm like, is there any way I can get a tour? Like, is
Yeah,
there any way I can see a little behind the scenes? I really want to see your bridge. I really want
yeah.
to. And they kind of look at me like I'm a little bit nuts and kind of fit the
My
bill.
wife's head of
Yeah.
safety for a small shipping company, and every time we go on a ship or a boat, she's up inspecting the life rafts, checking all the expiry dates on the fire extinguishers. She's an ex-auditor as well, a surveyor, sorry, so you just can't help herself.
What I found, even outside of actually going on the ships, is how much maritime news there is that I just didn't know to lean into before. So, like the ghost ships and the fact that the pirating is still such a thing in the world, and
Mm.
the dragging of the anchors and cutting of internet cables. I mean, there are so many angles of really global impact news stories that I don't think I was associating with maritime until
Yeah.
it was all around me and I was thinking about the impact of these things on, our
So,
clients and the industry.
Yeah. If we all do our jobs
yeah.
really, really well, no one will know we're there.
That's your secret, call out for the like CIA. You're like doing it well, you're all safe, and no one knows.
But what about your sort of personal journey? 'Cause I think that's always kind of interesting. I always say, I mean, you said you had no exposure to maritime. In my experience, everybody either kind of has a family connection or it's just some random kind of thing that brings them into the thing. But what led you to the position at Ripple? Or just briefly in your career, what sort of arc has it taken?
So I don't have the family one. The career arc, essentially, I spent a lot of my early career at a company called the Corporate Executive Board, which went on to sell to Gartner. So it doesn't exist anymore today, but was management consulting. So best practices in industries, mostly managed services, but became increasingly tech enabled over time. And was there from the time that they went public until they were about a
Wow.
5,000 person organization. Rapid growth of an organization across those dozen years, and I loved it. I love the growth and scale part of the journey. I like to figure out product market fit and where we're going and really think about the opportunity ahead of us. So I ultimately left CEB when I thought it had gotten sort of so large that it wasn't on that fun part of the curve anymore,
Mm.
and started helping other companies do that rapid growth part of the trajectories of thinking about things like entering new markets and launching new products, and was doing that when I met a company called Three Pillar Global, which is an outsourced product development firm that helps build solutions for other companies. And so just a tremendous amount of fun in a worldwide engineering organization that serves large companies who are building their digital
Wow.
products that serve salute companies. And we had some verticals where we were deepest, but a fairly wide swath. So when I mean that, I think here in the US, people know like Park Mobile, the pay app when you park your car and pay for your parking right there on your phone is a kind of solution that we'd be building, and just loved it. And we grew while I was there by more than $100 million. So got to go on that journey again of mergers and acquisitions and growing into new countries. Just was bitten by the bug, and ultimately left Three Pillar to take the CEO role at an ed tech company that was, working along that same pathway, that had an LMS and was working on college classes and workforce readiness classes and certifications for individuals. And it was in that arc that you sort of bring together building digital product with a learning management system that does training, certification, and compliance, that that Ripple reached out and said, "This is our vision of what we're putting together." And at first, my first answer was absolutely, "What do I know about Maritime?" And the amazing recruiter like responding, he said, "Wait, it's not as far from your path as you think. Let me tell you about what we're doing." And it was, global organization coming together as the merger of three acquisitions that the private equity firm had done, and really four businesses behind that, four brands, and to build this HR workforce readiness platform to think about all the things that needed to be done. And I was hooked, and on the growth curve, so rapidly growing and scaling workforce that's in, a dozen countries. So there were lots of things that got me excited really about the trajectory and the place of the
So
company and where they were going.
you didn't know Chad beforehand. I just kind of assumed you were someone in his network that he sort of plucked to. Wow. Okay.
I didn't. We were connected through their
Wow.
search process, and made the jump from one to the other. Um, and
Yeah.
have loved working with them. They're sort of innovative and interesting, and had a thesis of what was able to be built. They have definitely a buy-in and build model in the private equity firm. So buy up the foundational pieces of the software and then put them together and then start to build on them and really increase your capability for marketplace, which I was here for. Absolutely.
I think it might be helpful just to kind of, for those the initiated. You mentioned the brands that you'd brought together that come under common ownership. Just tell us a little bit about those businesses.
Sure thing. So the first business was a company in the US that called Marine CFO, that was really the administrative and crewing side of some ferry-based companies here, sort of smaller vessels. They were rapidly joined by the company out of Vancouver called the Marine Learning Systems, which
Yeah.
Murray Goldberg.
Murray,
Yeah, I met
yes.
Murray many years ago. I haven't seen him for a long time, but we had a few chats in the past. Yeah.
Well, then So the dynamic personalities, and they're dreaming big, and they were solving really that training and certification space, the compliance space for large scale cruise companies. And then as I joined, they were completing the acquisition of Adonis HR out of Norway, that had really been working in the European and Scandinavian markets to solve for cruise and ferry crewing operations. So some of the elements starting as early as recruiting all the way through payroll. They had just acquired a company called ShipAdmin before the combination into Ripple, that did some vessel side tracking, logging, things for the captain on board. So together, you really had a number of component parts of what I think about as that life cycle. So if you think of recruiting to planning and scheduling to training and certifying to assessing skills to then managing while on board, pulling your payroll calculation as people are ready for that, and then all of the compliance documentation and all of the record keeping that kind of goes in a flywheel. We had the component parts together.
Right.
Integrate and then build additional modules from.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something that Nick and I started working
Yeah.
together on a couple of years ago. Was working for Ocean Technologies Group, the human capital management in Maritime, and looking at that. And funnily enough, I was very close to doing something on the the same theme on cruise, because I think it is slightly different. Maybe we get a little chance to talk about that. But really, that's looking at that whole life cycle, which in my experience, very few companies really do. They've got training over here, which a bunch of people are focused on, and then there's the sort of, like you mentioned, the kind of maritime HR crewing function. There's quite often a lot of conversation that happens there, but it's not really looking at the full employee life cycle from hire to retire. Really, it's not looking at that and putting that sort of data together. And the report that Nick and I worked on together was really trying to kind of be a bit of a clarion call that there's much more that can be done here in terms of looking at how people drive the KPIs of a business. So what's your sort of vision for pulling all of that together with the component parts that you've got there in Ripple?
Well, I think you hit the sort of value proposition right on the head in the technology space. It's really the interconnection of data. So the point solutions are all over the industry, small maritime specific point solutions that solve any given problem or pain point. So flight booking over here, and then training over there, and payroll over here. And what we're hearing from clients is that they have a different provider for each of those things. And the employee data set lives inside of each of those things and doesn't communicate to each other. So they can train and certify and have all the documentation, and it doesn't do anything to speak back to your scheduling function. Or in that scheduling function, it doesn't do anything to speak to the payroll capabilities on the other side of the house. And so everybody's re-entering data and not able to see the whole picture. And so I think our vision is to think of it as a hub and spoke model, so that the employee data is the center point of everything that comes from it. And so that you can start to solve those pain points from the same employee data, so we call it Crew Hub, of course, in this industry, but where all of that exists. And if you're trying to solve for scheduling, you've got the same data set. You can pull that out for who needs to be trained for that particular voyage. The same data set that goes back in. Okay, now who needs to be paid against that voyage? All the same data set. Start to then layer in all the AI tools you guys talk about all the time. Really harness the efficiencies of having that interconnection without having to do it all at once. Because we recognize that change management is a real thing.
Yeah, I think that's a recurrent theme in everything that Nick and I talk about, particularly when you've got these platform plays where you're trying to bring it all together. I think anyone who's approaching that and who's imagining that they can have it all day one, it just doesn't happen like that. You need to be able to go with people. You need to accept that there may be good reasons why they're really keen to hang on to an existing vendor over here or some in-house software. I think you've got to be sympathetic to that.
I think that is so true. And I think in so many cases where companies start is replacing software that is homegrown, something in their own system. And by software, that might be an exaggeration. It's often, a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a whiteboard on the wall, but they've got some system that they've been trying to use for years and years and years. And the complexity and growth of the company is starting to break that system. And they need to fix the one place they're having the pain point, or two places. They can't conceive of very often starting with all of it and just going soup to nuts. It's usually more of a rollout process.
And I think just to, again, for the listeners who might not be so familiar with it, Nick and I kind of touched on this in an episode a little while ago, but you're mainly operating at the moment in the cruise space. And I think that's one of the areas where the size of operation, as far as the people side of it, is huge. Has that kind of shocked you as well, like working in just how many employees there are within a cruise company, and then on a vessel, how many employees are, the scales are massive, aren't they?
I had no idea. No idea. So we mostly do serve or what I would say our primary market, because we do have clients at sort of all size and scale, but our primary market at this point is cruise, ferry, so offshore and energy market, places where lots and lots of humans are on the ship. And the crew is one of the most complex things they're running. The smaller the operations, I would say if you're a tugboat and you're leaving from the same port and going back to the same port on a regular 8-hour shift, and you have the same 4 people doing 4 jobs across the day, not near the complexity we see when you start thinking about a cruise ship with thousands of crew members on board, with hundreds of role specifications, with each of those role specifications needing dozens of different training certifications that can change by international waterway on the same voyage. And then the payroll complexity of a crew that was flown in from all over the world to do that work.
And also as well, that one of the things that surprised me, because we acquired a crew management platform under Ocean Technologies Group, and I'd always kind of worked with them as APIs and kind of had an idea of what they did. But when we actually got one and we got under the bonnet of what it actually does, things like understanding the different labor agreements that there are with all those different nationalities, labor laws, and then what's been negotiated with unions. And then, and all of these have to be factored in. And that's one of the reasons why you need something that's kind of geared towards maritime, I think, geared towards the trade that you're working in, because it's very niche,
I've heard it put that really started to change my thinking on the industry, that the number of intercombinations of accruing a cruise ship when you have thousands of crew members on board is exponential. It's not additive. It's exponential to a number that most of us can't conceive of. You like write it across. So people say like grains of sand, that the way you can't conceive of how many there are on the beach. This is the same idea, which is where really strong computing capabilities and AI are going to come to play. The efficiency gained, where you can start to think about not only immediate planning, but how do you plan out for your employee base for 6 months? How do you contingency plan when the hurricane knocks out one of the docks that you were going to leave from? And so now all your plans are out the window for, how do you even plan for the simple solutions? Like, somebody calls out for a sick day and you have to replace every one of the roles they were going to play, and they don't make their flight to the dock. So it's really fascinating at the level of complexity that I think I not being from maritime, didn't think about outside the industry.
Yeah. But what I'm always interested in as well, because I felt very strongly that my background before I came into maritime has been really useful in maritime, and was able to apply quite a lot of things in there and sort of bring in, I guess, a little bit of diversity of thought in a way to some of the approaches that you kind of come at. What would you say from your career outside of it that you can see that's being done in the wider world, let's say, that you think could be really brought to bear in maritime?
That's a great question. I think when I think about it, it's the willingness to see and experiment with new solutions. So I have no preconceived notion that it has to be done the way it was done before. And so getting to just think about what's working across the current business tactics or what's happening in other industries. I don't have that requirement to come from or break out of old ways of thinking, because I don't have them. So I think it's a little bit of getting to, answer the question of, well, how do they do that? And then input whatever that is in other industries. How do, other complex structures work? I think maritime has some interesting parallels to aviation for the international efforts, for the fact that crew are on site or they're not, and how do you solve for that problem? So there are places you can learn from that have the parallels, and then just places where software development, software solutions that can be applied from anywhere.
Yeah, I think, Nick, this is something we talk about a lot, isn't it? Like sort of like that blend at the moment that we're getting sort of lots of new thought coming in from different areas, and it's trying to work out, where's the sweet spot between the kind of doing it the maritime way and what we can gain from elsewhere.
Yeah, I think people are probably going to assume this is a two-way conversation because I've just shut up. But I kind of assumed getting the two of you together, this would happen. That you're both from very similar worlds and you have a lot to talk about. So it's been really nice to just shut up and listen to it. Yeah, I'm fascinated by people who come into maritime from outside, and particularly who come into maritime software from outside, because I think on the one hand, there's lots of complexity to maritime and there's lots of things that make maritime unique. And then on the other hand, I also think there's quite a lot where we think we're special, but actually we're not that special. And a lot of what works in other industries can be parlayed across. And I think particularly when you think about growing a software business, I think we as an industry generally, I am massively generalizing, I think we're quite bad at kind of recognizing what goes on in other sectors and what best practice looks like. And so, yeah, it's really interesting to hear your view on kind of what are the things that you've done in those last two growth journeys that you're trying to bring into maritime that perhaps we won't have thought of, having spent a few years stuck in the industry?
Yeah. And the one that right now is sort of has my head spinning. Have you read the book Abundance by, I think it's Ezra Klein?
I'll add it
No.
to my list.
You should. You have to kind of set aside there's like some political commentary, I think, in there where they're, kind of aimed at the US political situation. But there's a really interesting underlying question about the intersection of governance and growth. And just the basic questions of like, why is it so hard to build a bridge right now that crosses a river that's
Right.
between two different states? And then uncovers the number of governmental regulations and entities and bodies at the local level, the state level, the federal level, and then coming at it from like the environment on one side and the technology rules on another side and the usage, land policies on another. And that has me in my head thinking, wow, if it's difficult to build a bridge, like how are we going to do things like the decarbonization where or going to these hybrid ferries where it's countries, it's continents in some cases that have to get the same vessel that can dock in both those places and all at the same time. So my mind is just swirling with that intersection. And then the book says not a word about maritime.
Yeah. But I think there's an interesting thing as well that like where technology comes in, this idea that, the move fast and break things mindset, you bring that into maritime, you're going to get into trouble really, really quickly. Because the one thing people really want to know is that the governance, it's not going to break. Exactly. The reliability, even if you're putting up with all sorts of other things, as long as they know that the reliability is going to be there, and you can't afford to take. I mean, it's a very risk averse, for very obvious reasons, sector. So I think depending on where you come from, if you've been working you said you'd been working in compliance areas as well. So I'm sure it's very similar in other mining and other sort of, adjacent things. But I think quite often people coming in with that great tech flair don't realize how some of the conservatism they come up against comes from that place of absolute safety first kind of, risk aversion.
Just as I was talking and getting to know the Ripple hypothesis and the plans for the company, the Baltimore Bridge accident happened. And that really summed up the need for training and compliance and what happens when things go wrong at an epic level. Just it sort of like ended, the the conversation with just like an exclamation point, like, oh, that's the problem. I see it.
Yeah, and I noticed on your CV, just having a look through, that you'd had commercial roles as well. And I would just dwell on the fact that, my experience was you could be in trying to sell things into people and then kind of like, reaching a barrier, you're trying to sell in a new training solution or whatever. The minute there's an incident, they're like, then the money is just, there's no, no problem. They're on the phone and they want to buy now. And it's kind of like that crazy mindset that like the investment before to prevent it, the money isn't there. But then once an incident happens, the investment suddenly appears to kind of to take corrective action. And it can be so frustrating as a vendor, as a supplier.
Yes, those accelerating events, as I like to think of them in sales, but where somebody really helps you down the path with that of in making a super relevant example in those moments of, why is training important? Why is compliance and documentation important? Right? What can go wrong? And you just can post a headline. You're like, oh, do we need to say more here? And nobody wants to be in that headline, right? Nobody wants to be the owner of that vessel. Yeah. Nobody, wants to have that vessel sit with their name painted on the side of it in a harbor for 6 weeks while they have to dig it out. Very bad for advertising.
Yeah, very much so. One of the things I'd love to know, because it's like you're sort of the journey that you're on at the moment, putting those brands together. You're creating a new brand in Ripple. Is something? Sorry, Nick, to dominate this bit of the conversation. This is exactly what I went through when we put the businesses that became Ocean Technologies Group together, and I was responsible for building that brand that everyone was going to get behind. So how are you looking at that exercise of trying to build the Ripple brand? I'd be really interested to know what you're thinking.
Are you kidding?
About.
I should be asking you. Do you have any tips?
I've plenty of more stories.
Because being new to the market, I still talk about OTG as one thing, and then you get into it, and it's really all these pieces. So it's uh, it's very real that you have to be measured and think about it and be. I'm both so excited about Ripple and where we're going and what it symbolizes about the capability to really serve this passenger vessel market and in Europe and in North America, where we're strongest and the places where sort of have our most of our clients, and the end-to-end solutions by having all the parts of the four organizations that came together. But there are clients in each one of those organizations that purchase from those brands and love those. They love Murray, they love Perova, they love the
Mm.
history they've had with those organizations. And so you don't want to leave behind the greatness, and you want to paint the vision of where you're going and share that vision and explain why the new brand really represents more than the sum of the parts,
Yeah.
and how integration is one of the primary pillars of the work that we're doing. So having that centralized one system that's interconnected, it's not, as they would call in the marketing world, right, a house of brands. It's not a bunch of different companies that are owned by one. It is one organization, one team going forward that has the features and functionality of four before it, right?
The other thing as well is from the brand thing, because I think it's interesting, is that you mentioned there your offices around the world as well. It's that internal audience too, trying to get them to feel like one company and to really be working together. When you've got the barrier of different brands and obsessing about which division you're kind of from, which tribe, it just acts as a barrier, I think, to kind of being able to kind of work collectively together. So it's really important. The employee branding side of it is just as important in my experience.
And it goes to, one, it's a global operation that's happening around the clock. So having people that, are kind of in the follow the sun mentality. This year, I'm going to
Nice.
Crew Connect
See you there.
in Manila, and also our office and our team in Manila for the first time. Team, I'm coming. I'm so excited. I didn't make the conference last year because it conflicted with another one. And so I'm really excited to get there. But that really does help shape our ability to serve these companies that are from all of these countries, the crew members that are from all of these countries, to think globally and be able to respond globally and speak globally. It all kind of comes together that way. Even if it does make our monthly all hands town hall, really
Yes.
What time do
complicated.
you have it?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a bit. We ended up doing 2 a day, and you always feel you do such a terrible disservice to the second one because you've done the, you'd think you'd be better the next time round, but it's like the energy at the end of the day, like, it's not so good.
It is so true. And you're like excusing yourself when when you make the other agreement where you're like, yes, I'll absolutely do it at 5 a.m. my time. So it'll be like the end of the time. And then you're like going like, okay, wait, where are the buttons again? It's like, it is. So that part of it, but it's wonderful to see everyone and to figure out technology for a truly globally dispersed remote first workforce. And people can say remote, and then this is like this industry is like another level of remote.
Yeah, yeah. Which is all the harder in the human capital management space. It's
Mhm.
communication is such a fundamental part, and it's one of the things that doesn't come easy in our space.
Well, and that's probably where some things like the Starlink and the satellite interconnectivity and now having it gets so important for, seafarer well-being. I think it's those of us who just sit on Wi-Fi all day long forget how much it connects you to the world. And so watching it rapidly expand so that seafarers themselves get to use it, you can just feel the energy shift of not only what's capable with using technology, but what's capable in their personal lives. And I think that'll help recruit and retain more seafarers as we go who can call home. I mean, who doesn't want to talk to their 2-year-old before bedtime every once in a while,
Can I ask, you mentioned about technology there. That it's one thing to talk about integrating the brand and getting people excited about the brand, but you then have to follow that up with a really well integrated product that is not 4 different products
Mhm.
with the Ripple logo slapped on top of it. So how are you going about that integration piece, and what are some of the things you wish you knew kind of before you pop the hood on these various products that you brought in?
Complicated questions. And this is where, of course, I wish my amazing chief product officer was here because she would jump in and be all over it. I would say there's the first and foremost is just philosophically, we're parallel tracking. So we have clients on current software that need to be supported, maintained, new features need to be rolled out. They need to be treated like the amazing clients they are. And they're already on software, and that software is running their ships right now. So it's like we can't miss a beat. And we have to take all those amazing component features and shift them on to a new cloud-based architecture. And so they're sort of making sure that you can lift and shift all the things that are working amazing, and then the things that need to be reimagined in order to really be right for this fully online interconnected world, how you make those work without leaving anyone behind that's still doing, replication services or, remote training servers or working in unconnected. So the onshore offshore complexity of this space from a technical perspective is really interesting. But so trying to do both, which will inevitably take time and effort and resources in order to make sure that you don't miss an opportunity on either side to do it.
Yeah.
But not all of it needs to be called like rebuilt. Some of it just needs to be replatformed, placed on the new architecture, and some of it because these organizations have been around for a couple dozen years. You need to be rethought for truly modern technology, things like mobile first.
Yeah, that's I imagine a big challenge. What's the kind of timeline on bringing all of that together?
We will have our first clients on the new platform in 2026. So we're barreling towards it. A transition strategy will be sort of a longer, more methodical piece for those that have current software on board, because we'll need to work with each of those clients on a change management process and be really thoughtful and supportive as they go through it. I think they're excited about it. They're certainly who's leading the work of where does our roadmap go, what's most important first. But it'll also be those clients that'll have the most thought behind the how.
But I think, Nick, I think that's a real, challenge for the space more generally, not just even when you're putting things together. I think there's a real kind of balance to strike between making sure that you're able to kind of move your offering forward and people can see that it's developing and being invested in, versus also kind of making sure that as you mentioned there, Heather, that the underlying architecture can support the way in which things are going in the future, and it's a difficult trade-off, to be able to strike, because really you're keeping two technology stacks kind of moving along at the same time, which clearly it requires a lot of investment.
It does. I sometimes think, to the joke about, what you see under the hood, you think, would it be easier to just build in 2025 capability from the ground up? You almost envy the startup world, to do that. The difference is they don't have this amazing client list, or they get to work with that's really answering the questions on what do you need and where do you need it to go and what pain points do you need us to solve. And I really think of it almost as like development in partnership, where we're not doing it we're doing it with.
Are all the clients kind of happy to go on that journey, or do you meet resistance? And if you do, how do you overcome it?
I don't know that we've met resistance yet, although maybe some skepticism of people that have felt like they've heard the market say for a little while, we're going to be able to do this and haven't delivered, or where they're like, I'll believe it when I see it a bit, or bring me the demo as soon as you can. You hear the skepticism of like, I want to see. And then there certainly are those that, because of the complexity of their operations, that I think feel some level of like daunting pressure through like, what will change management require? How will a process go? And I'm sure all of us have lived through either a change in like payroll systems or our CRM system inside the business. And you're like, oh boy, here we go. Like you're going to learn all the new things. We're going to get it wrong. We're going to have to rip it out and replace it 3 times.
But I think that, for me, I think that's where the relationship thing is really important as well, that they can get to know you and understand your motivations and where you're coming from, and to allay any kind of concerns.
Yeah, I hope so. And certainly invite every piece of feedback we can get, and partnership along the way, and being thoughtful about what process looks like, and then hopefully having some good case studies to learn from and work with as we go through it.
And then kind of building on that, really looking ahead at where Ripple's going, what do you see as the kind of long-term, well, maybe not even long-term, but 2, 5, 10-year kind of vision for what Ripple will be, and how much do you plan to build versus how much do you plan to buy?
I think it's absolutely
Right.
a combination effort. I think we will build and buy. I think this market is just ripe for additive acquisitions. So where you're bringing together additional technology, capability, product and geography, certain markets, and then certainly segments. So I think when I think further down the road, not only do I think the product's just going to get stronger, better, faster, we bring in more AI tools and technology speed capability. But then I think the place where you start to really build for the use case of the adjacent segments. So, we talked about why are passenger vessels sort of the complex part of the market that we serve. Just to the side of it is, just overnight ferries, right? It kind of sits between cruise and then ferry, and then adjacent to that, sort of the yachting industry has some of the same things, but on a smaller scale. And then you get down to kind of commercial shipping that has more vessels than people. So they have a lot of the complexity, but say they might not need cabin allocation, or some of the details might not be as complex. So how do we make the right size offering that is faster, lighter to implement for that use case that's got somewhat of a different level of complexity on different angles of the business, and keep going from there. And so I kind of, I my team keeps seeing me like draw this pyramid, but if you think about the top being the place of the most complexity, the biggest vessels, biggest crew members, number of crew members on board, and then kind of going out to where more and more vessels, smaller and smaller crew sizes. How do we keep the product supporting those in a way that feels hyper
I
relevant?
hadn't even thought about cabin allocations as as a thing that you would have, because I only worked on merchant ships 2025
Yeah,
crew.
that's
You just sort of worked it out as you went. But yeah, you must have to have software that runs cabin allocations for thousands of people. It's mind-boggling.
absolutely. Yeah, so that's what I think is like you just keep building, into to be the provider of choice for more and more
Mm.
exact use cases. And like I said, we have clients in almost all segments. Some of I just think we build for that really deep, complex use case. And so how do we, I don't know if the right word is lighten it up, but how do we make it the most efficient, easiest to implement, easiest to utilize for each use case, each segment? And so I think that's where we'll go. And we'll definitely use technology tools to get there. And I think we will do acquisitions along the way. If anybody wants to join us, reach out. And then we'll, continue growing. The private equity world, as they say, organic and inorganic together.
What just on the acquisitions? I'm curious. What are some of the things that you look at and think absolutely not, and what are some of the things you look at and get really really excited about?
Uh, I get really excited about the nimble, small tech companies that are building super
Right.
cool AI, that are figuring out the capability, and they don't have the weight of large companies and bureaucracies and councils and all the things behind them. They're just building. They're smart people in front of a computer. I love seeing all that they're doing, and just imagining where it can go.
That's super interesting because
Is
that's
like
so
really the
different to what we see. So many PE funds are just looking for EBITDA. Yeah.
EBITDA.
So that's totally opposite.
It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I'm excited about, right? I mean, you call Chad
Yeah.
and ask him what he's excited about, and I'm sure it has many more financial
Right.
dynamics to it than what I get excited about with the piece. And
No,
from
but
a company perspective, I look forward to growing into Africa and the Middle East and Asia, huge markets where we just have
Mm.
just a beginning, and I get really excited about what they're doing in those areas of the world and how I think we can serve to them. And so I think about, do we
Yeah.
buy or build that? Is that one client at a time? Or do you join forces with somebody who's already in those geographies and be stronger together?
Just based on everything you've learned in your career so far, then if there was one piece of advice or one kind of key lesson that you could take that cuts across everything you've done, what would that be?
Okay, so the one that I think I use, regardless of industry, job, where you are, if I'm talking to a mentee or my college age daughter, or anybody in the business, whatever that business is, it's to say yes. To to say yes to crazy opportunities. To say yes to projects that feel way outside your comfort zone. That take you somewhere, to another country you haven't been to an industry you haven't been in, to a presentation on stage you haven't done before, and just say yes, and figure it out after. But lean in.
I think that is fantastic advice, and it's something that I've always said myself. It's the only through line that I've had is just never, just because people won't ask
Yeah.
you twice, right?
Well, right, and I think you start getting a reputation for being the person who will take on sort of the unconventional and the wacky move, and just doesn't try to play it so safe all the time, so that you're willing to grow. I
Mm.
am absolutely one of those people that believe that you should grow every day. So I continuously am reading something. I'm the first person to get sort of lost at the conference, like actually sitting down to hear one of the presentations, because I'm consumed by it. But just the growing and learning and doing something new. That college daughter that I mentioned. So I have five
Wow.
teenage girls, if that tells you anything about my crazy life.
Wow.
But the oldest is she's heading out at the end of the week to Madagascar for
Wow.
her study abroad. Where like the kind of place where I had to like Wikipedia it, and start really understanding where I was going, because I hadn't been before, you had to, and I'm just so excited that she
Yeah.
did something non-conventional, because I would have been the first one to be like, I want to go to like the London School of Economics, and, and
Mm.
go somewhere I'd been a million times, and, you know, had heard about. And instead she's going to go, work on lemurs and,
It's amazing how those
you
things
know,
compound.
the,
You
all
know,
the fun of
saying yes to something like that at 17, 18, 19, whatever, over a 10, 15, 20-year period, it really, really has an impact on someone's trajectory in life. And in a way that it's impossible to see when you're that young.
Yes. And I feel like it's shaped my future, my career trajectory all the way through, to have crossed back and forth between revenue generation in its purest form. So whether that was sales or product launch, or the product side of, running a P&L or working on product market fit. And that crisscrossing back and forth sort of forced you to really sympathize with the multiple sides of the house. And then certainly moving into the executive seats, you start going, wow, I what do I know about IT? I'm supposed to understand IT or finance, or some of the places in the business I hadn't been. And you just get really nervous and sweaty, and you look a lot of things up, and you surround yourself by super smart people, and keep saying yes.
I sometimes find
Great.
myself, if I've not had that kind of slightly nervous, sweaty palm moment for 6, 9 months, I
Mhm.
start to get really itchy feet and go out trying to look for it.
And that's when you
Yeah,
buy a
exactly.
newspaper, is it, Nick?
That's when you launch a new podcast. That's when you like. I see you, Nick. I see some of the
I
things
feel
that
seen.
you do. Yeah, I definitely think there's. Is there a military saying that's, if you're
Right.
not nervous,
That's
don't
good. I
go.
like that.
And so I think, we should all embrace it. If it's not driving a little bit of adrenaline through the veins, you might not be trying hard enough.
And
Again, very
one
good
more question
advice.
for you. What do you see as the kind of most either exciting or impactful technology trend for the maritime sector over the next kind of 5 years or so?
Oh goodness. I feel like if I didn't say AI, everybody would jump on, how are you? And not thinking about that. But um I think if I went broader than just AI, I think it's about transformation. It's about really accepting the digital transformation, whether you're onshore or on board, and thinking about where the entire industry can go and how those efficiency gains can be realized. So I was reading about, maritime, there's a concept of maritime 5.0, and what we can learn from the data, and what we can do with systems and records, and then of course layering in the AI efficiency to that I think the industry really hasn't seen anything yet about how
Yeah.
fast it can transform. And if people are struggling with the to imagine it, I mean, go back to the case study of like the transformation in media. when we couldn't imagine a world without, newspapers being thrown on our front porches, and where that's gone to today, to being like news in your pocket 24/7. And I think Maritime, that digital transformation is going to blow all of our minds.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because people used to kind of talk about it like the death of newspapers, but actually media is consumed more now than it ever was at any point in history. So consumption has gone up. It's just that the underlying business model is what changed, enabled by the technology. And I think that's an interesting way to think about what could happen in maritime.
Right. It's already such a growing industry. I mean, there's not a day that I don't read about somebody ordering a new ship, launching a new vessel, some of these like incredible cruise ships that are rolling out, that are doing it. So, I mean, imagine now you start making it, cleaner, more sustainable, faster to build and launch, and easier to get your crew on board and keeping everyone safe and compliant. I just think it's going to continue to explode in what's possible in the companies that exist, and then what comes online because of it. So autonomous ships, I'm interested to hear your talk in a couple months. It makes me a little nervous, but I say that, and then I drive a Tesla that I throw into self-driving mode, anytime I need to also check a text on my phone. Don't tell my kids that.
Heather, thank you so much for doing this. This was really good fun. Thank you for saying yes.
Thank you guys for so much for having me. It was wonderful to be here today, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in person at events this fall.
Yeah, and good luck with putting the whole brand show together, and yeah, it's going to be exciting to see what happens.
Thank you. I'm going to call you after this for some tips on what you learned along the way.
Okay. Well, great. Thanks once again,
Thanks
Heather,
all.
and thanks everyone for watching.
Thank you.